The briefing is brought to you in association with Spain. From the wilds of the Atlantic to the warmth of Mediterranean isles, the Spanish coast has something for every occasion. And whether chartering a yacht or renting a more modest motorboat, there's no better way to explore this magical country's lesser-known highlights than from the open water. Listen out for a new summer season of The Concierge on Monocle Radio. Join Robert Bound and friends as they turn navigator for an unforgettable journey along the Spanish coast. From hidden gems to legendary gastronomy, and with the unique drama of the America's Cup in the host city of Barcelona added to the mix, discover why the time is right to take to the waves. The Concierge, returning to Monocle Radio in July. This summer, set sail for Spain.
You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 1st of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme.
These reports over the last 48 hours certainly don't help with the temperature going down. I'm not going to be Pollyannish about it. We're obviously concerned about escalation.
The White House's national security spokesman John Kirby stating the obvious there and joining a chorus of warnings against all-out war in the Middle East as Iran holds a funeral for Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Then we'll head to Venezuela, where China's backing of incumbent Nicolás Maduro claiming election victory, in contrast to many Western and Latin American nations, risks provoking yet another global hotspot. After that, we'll take a 180-degree course correction in tone and look at the world of perfume at the Paris Olympic Games. And finally, the weekly global countdown is once again upon us. Fernando, where in the world are we going?
Hello, Chris. For today's global countdown, we will learn more about the delights of Turkish pop.
All of that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Earlier today in Tehran, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, led prayers at the funeral of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed this week in the Iranian capital. The assassination has left the region on tenterhooks as Iran vows to retaliate for the killing on its soil, even as Israel is unapologetic. Although Israel hasn't officially claimed responsibility for Haniyeh's death, Israeli Defense Forces did reveal that they had also killed Hamas military commander Mohammed Deif, the alleged architect of the terror group's deadly October 7th attack. Well, I'm joined now by Bill Law, Middle East analyst and editor of Arab Digest, and also by Ayla Jean Yakli, journalist based in Istanbul. Great to have you both on. Bill, let's start with you. At this funeral earlier today, there was chanting from the crowd of death to Israel and America. Perhaps not that surprising in the region at this point, but how much of a real threat of retaliation is there?
Yeah, good morning, Chris. Or good afternoon, rather. The chanting is nothing new. This has been going on every time there is an incident with the Israelis or with the Americans. What is perhaps the danger here is that this assassination of Haniyeh on Iranian soil in Tehran is an embarrassment, and the Ayatollah needs to present a threat that is seen to be credible by the Iranian people, primarily by the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and some of the more hardliners within his regime. And so I think that there is a danger here. However, I do also believe that it is worth reiterating that the last thing that Iran wants, the last thing the Ayatollah wants, is a war with Israel. It's not something that is going to be in any way helpful to the situation. So he has to figure out a way to deliver some kind of retaliation, one that Israel is prepared to ride with. We've seen this tit for tat going on for a long time. We recall back in April when there was the assassination in Damascus of two IRGC generals. The Iranians sent a blanket of missiles over Israel, but they gave plenty of warning, and the Israelis were able to respond. I mean, this is the kind of thing that perhaps will prevent sliding into this all-out war. The danger is, of course, as ever, is the extremist in Israel's most extreme right-wing government, the extremist in that government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister. These gentlemen want a war. They want to see Iran and America pulled into this war because they have a kind of a messianic religious mania, if you will. Their beliefs that they can achieve their goal, which is to drive the Palestinians out of Palestine, out of Gaza, which they're working very hard on doing right now, out of East Jerusalem, out of the West Bank. That's the danger, I believe, is the extremists, those very hardline extremists within that Netanyahu government.
And Ayla, to bring you in on this, I mean, how was Haniyeh perceived where you are in Turkey and in the wider region for that matter? I mean, is there much sympathy for him, a willingness to sort of stand with Iran on this?
Indeed. He did enjoy, for one thing, full support, really, from the Turkish government. And among the people, I think that following Israel's response to the October 7th attack, he was seen as a credible leader for the Palestinians, despite maybe some people's wariness of Hamas. And following his assassination, the Turkish foreign minister Hakan Fidan, who, just to note, was actually with Haniyeh in Tehran a day before the assassination at the Iranian presidential inauguration, Fidan, the foreign minister, said that this was a murder of peace. He, deemed Haniyeh a peacemaker, a way to bring about a conclusion to the violence in Gaza.
Just to follow that up, Ayla, I mean, if interesting that choice of words to describe him as someone of peace, and kind of staying with that and what Bill was saying, I just wonder what kind of escalation at this point means for Turkey. President Erdogan has threatened to get involved in the past. Could these assassinations almost be seen as some kind of warning to him?
It's hard to say whether he would interpret it that way, but as far as the war in Gaza spilling over into a regional conflict, Erdogan, like other leaders in the Middle East, is worried about this. He has not yet responded to the order by Iran's supreme leader to strike Israel in retaliation. And for Erdogan, he's displayed a relatively restrained response. He posted a tweet after the killing of Haniyeh, and he called it, quote, an example of Zionist barbarism, but he hasn't spoken about it publicly otherwise. However, despite these signs of restraint from Erdogan, just before the assassination, he did say that Turkey could use military force against Israel. The reading of that has been largely that may be aimed at his own base in Turkey, which wants him to do more to help Palestinians. He's positioned himself as the most outspoken champion of the Palestinian cause. But the idea that he would want a military confrontation with Israel, a direct one, is still seen as very unlikely.
And Bill, you mentioned the sort of far-right elements in Israel. Israel itself does appear to be stepping up its attacks clearly here. They claimed a milestone, as the defense minister said, with Hamas's Mohammed Daif being announced dead. Do we imagine that they are actually close to sort of rendering Hamas inoperable at this point? Is that even possible? Does Hamas have the power itself to retaliate?
Well, I don't think that, although the Israelis would like us to believe that they have effectively now dismantled Hamas or in the process of achieving that goal, which they set out to do at the beginning of the war back in October, I don't think that will happen. I think that all of these losses are things that Hamas can, in some form or another, sustain, and the resistance will continue in some form or shape. What the Israelis need to do, because they realize that support for their war, for their genocide, is draining dramatically day by day. So they needed to show some results. Netanyahu was in Washington saying, once again, give us the weapons, we'll finish the job. They've already got the weapons. So one might ask, how many more weapons do you need, Mr. Netanyahu, to finish this job? This job will not be finished. The war will continue. The greatest threat, really, to the region, to the world, is as I said, these extremists in Netanyahu's cabinet, and then by extension, Mr. Netanyahu himself, of course, needs to extend this war as long as he can, because he's facing criminal charges, court actions. His own legacy, the great security provider for Israel, is now in tatters. He hasn't got much left other than this war, and he needs these, really public relations statements. I got Tania, I got Dev, and I'll finish the job. I don't think very many people see that happening. Therefore, the risk of course, this tumbling into an all-out war continues.
And just quickly, Isla, at the end, I mean, given what Bill was saying there about potentially this sort of escalation or Israel's view on this, I wonder if you could describe again sort of Turkey, Arab nations' view. Do they now expect, I mean, would this maybe increase the prospects for a ceasefire, to kind of take the other side of this instead of escalation?
I think that's something that they're all hoping for, that this sort of dramatic change in the momentum, let's say, of the conflict could actually force, both sides to double down on negotiations to find a resolution. But obviously, everyone is concerned that it could have just the opposite effect, that the calculus might now be that something like peace talks will be derailed.
Thanks very much, Bill and Isla. That was Bill Law, editor of Arab Digest, and Isla Jean Yakli, journalist based in Istanbul. Now here's Henry Rees-Sheridan with the day's other news headlines.
Thank you, Chris. The alleged mastermind of the 9/11 terror attacks and 2 others have reached a plea deal with prosecutors. The 3 men have been held at Guantanamo Bay for years without trial. The deal will allegedly spare the accused from the death penalty if they plead guilty. Far-right groups in the UK have been causing violent disorder across England overnight, including in central London, Hartlepool and Manchester. They claim to be protesting against the murders of young children in Southport, but the Prime Minister's press office said, while the right to peaceful protest must be protected at all costs, the Prime Minister will be clear that criminals who exploit the right in order to sow hatred and carry out violent acts will face the full force of the law. And French swimming sensation Léon Marchand has made history in Paris, taking home 2 gold medals and breaking 2 Olympic records in the butterfly and breaststroke events. He is also the first Olympian to compete the butterfly breaststroke double. For more Olympic news, join Monocle in Paris for our special series on the Games. Tune in from 800 London time every weekday. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Henry. The mood in Venezuela yesterday, in a word, was tense, as shops and public transport options were shuttered in much of the country for fear of further violent protests. After Venezuela's incumbent, Nicolás Maduro, continues to claim victory in a weekend election, despite the opposition claiming proof of their own victory, and an increasing number of foreign leaders, including even Brazil, calling on Maduro in true high school math class fashion to show his work and release the voting tallies for all to see. Well, I'm joined now by Tamara Tarasiuk-Broner, a director at the Inter-American Dialogue based in Uruguay. Tamara, great to have you on the show. What is your impression of the sort of mood in Venezuela at the moment? It does appear that things were a little quieter yesterday. I wonder if that's just sort of a regrouping.
Hi, Chris. What we're seeing in Venezuela today is increasing attempts to repress opposition voices, broadly speaking, not just opposition politicians. There are allegations of at least 17 people killed in the context of demonstrations. People in particularly low-income communities are receiving threats for supporting the opposition. We are seeing a lot of tension, abuses committed largely by armed pro-government groups that operate with impunity in the country, and top-level officials that are blindly clinging on to power and refusing to show evidence of their alleged electoral results. So tension is increasing, as you were saying, and I think we need to be paying attention to what happens in the country and to the reaction by the international community. And interestingly enough, given that what the government is doing is so blatant, they are generating a consensus in the international community to either openly question the electoral results announced by the authorities, or those who are trying to mediate and reach a negotiation point with the government, trying to ask them to produce the evidence that they say they have to support the electoral results.
Well, and on that point as well, I mean, as you say, there is this international consensus to a degree that is building. Brazil has also joined the kind of chorus of nations demanding to see these results. President Maduro has claimed he will release the tallies. I just wonder what, if anything, we are expecting there.
Well, either they don't have them or they are fabricating them. Those are the two options for not having released the tallies in time when they were supposed to. Electoral law in Venezuela is very clear. When the elections finish at 6 p.m., they're supposed to provide a copy of the tallies to monitors who are present at voting centers. And that's the same information that is transferred to the Central National Electoral Authority that compiles the information and produces the results. It took them several hours to announce the results. When they finally went online and public after midnight, they said there had been a terrorist attack on the system that did not allow them to count the tallies until then. And they came up with a piece of paper that was not produced where it should have been with the official tallies. So, it's very hard to believe that that's what happened. And it points to a result that is inconsistent with every other evidence that we have, including exit polls, what we saw on the streets, and the actual tallies that the opposition did have access to. They have put together a website with over 70% of the tallies that shows that Edmundo González, the opposition candidate, won by 67% against 30% of Maduro. And even with the 30% tallies that are left that have not been counted, the government wouldn't be able to reach the numbers that Edmundo González got.
Now, Tamara, again, back to that sort of international consensus, as you say, that is building, but there are a few countries that have not joined that international consensus. Russia, perhaps predictably, but also China is among those that congratulated President Maduro on his victory. I just wonder how key you think that might be for him to hold on.
I think Maduro has very little options after leaving office. And that's because he's implicated in crimes against humanity, and he's implicated in crimes linked to corruption, drug trafficking, money laundering. So some folks at the top levels will never be able to obtain reassurances of lasting impunity. And Maduro is certainly one of them. So his best option is to negotiate a way out with undemocratic governments that will not base their decisions on democratic principles or international human rights law. What I think is interesting in terms of the consensus is looking at what's happening in the region, because there used to be a division in always when we talk about Venezuela and Latin America and the Americas more generally. And you have left-wing governments that are reluctant to question what is happening in Venezuela. And, yesterday there was a vote at the Organization of American States, a regional body, to request the tallies for a decision that did not pass by one vote. But interestingly enough, there was no one in the entire Latin America region that voted in favor of Maduro. And that is a signal.
Yeah, very interesting. Both of those aspects, I suppose, that signal from the Organization of American States, but also the way you even describe the role that, say, China and undemocratic nations might play in this. I guess then the question to end is, does this feel to you different than last time? Because we have been here before. We've had a rival government set up in the last elections when there was also fraud claimed in those. Do you get the feeling that this is a bit different, that there is more pressure on Maduro and kind of, as you say, that even a country like China perhaps might be helping him to find some kind of way out?
I think it's very different than the whole Guaido interim government affair of 2019, because at that point, that happened a year after the election. So Maduro stole those elections by a very narrow margin, but the opposition had not organized itself and did not have the evidence to show that there was fraud. So a year later, they came up with a constitutional argument that justified that there was a vacuum of power and that Guaido was the interim president, and that generated a parallel government. Now we're talking about something that's completely different. We're talking about massive popular support that was expressed through an election that was very far from free and fair, but nonetheless, people mobilized, vote, and overwhelmingly voted against the government. So the request to the international community is to respect the will of the Venezuelan people with evidence. So I think that changes the game. And what the government is doing is extremely blatant in terms of stealing the election and ratcheting up the crackdown on opponents as they're doing as we speak. So it's very hard for any government that has minimum democratic credentials to support Maduro at this time.
Tamara Tarasiuk-Broner, director at the Inter-American Dialogue. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Chermak. Paris has for centuries been considered one of, if not the great homes of luxury, and one of the jewels in its crown is that of perfume. As early as the 18th century, master perfumers settled in Paris, developing the distillation process to extract the scent of the ingredients and create something sublime. Continuing and transmitting this tradition is the Maison Ormé, a perfume house which ensures that every single detail of the perfume-making process is a métier, a professional calling. Well, Baptiste Bouige is co-founder of the perfume Maison Ormé Paris and joined Emma Nelson at our studio in the French capital. They began by discussing how scent has been at the heart of French beauty and luxury for centuries.
I think it has, and we all have, even in our families, like an uncle or a grandmother that used to collect all of these beautiful small fragrance bottles. Since I'm a kid, my mother was a great director of creation in fragrances, and she used to collect the huge fragrance bottles. Every time she won awards for fragrances, she used to have them at home. So for me, it's always been just looking at those bottles was something quite amazing. We even knew the designers of fragrance bottles. We knew them as well as the perfumers. I often remember Dinan talking about drawing the bottle of opium with Saint Laurent, and Saint Laurent asking him if he wanted to take LSD before drawing it. It's that absolute creativity that is in fragrance making, but not only in the juice itself, but also in everything that's around it.
And you mentioned there the fact that it is an incredibly personal story, not just of perfume, but of your business. I mean, having a mother who has such an enormous and illustrious career in fragrance, you tell us a little bit more about her. What was it like deciding with her to actually create your own?
Well, since I'm a kid, I've always been at home smelling different things she was developing. She was so directing the creation for a lot of big brands, and I always knew I wanted to create a fragrance brand, but I wanted to tell stories that were very personal. I think, my favorite works of art, my favorite books, my favorite paintings are always when you talk about something very personal. In English, I think you have the right about what you know. And I think that's what's going to create the universal when you're being very honest. That's why there's a fragrance that's called Yvonne, as the name of my grandmother. fragrance called Le Passant, which is the smell I remember from my father that left when I was a kid. All of them are, just unique moments for me.
So explain to us a little bit about that moment when you and your mother go, yes, we're going to do this, and this is Maison Ormé. How did that feel?
Well, there was a couple of stories, Yvonne is one of them, that I really wanted to tell. And I went to see my mother and I told her, do you think you can make that fragrance for me? And she worked for a year on it, or a couple of years. And I smelled the fragrance. And I was like, yeah, that's it. The next day, I was working at Givenchy back in the days. And the next day I gave my resignation. And I told my mom, that's it, we're doing it. You don't have a choice now. And she was like, okay.
And you talk about the family heritage. I mean, how do you prepare yourself for a career as a perfumer? I mean, I think many of us who sort of read fiction remember Perfume by Patrick Suskind, with the story of a murderer, of this intense, overwhelming desire, this compulsion to make perfume. I would hope that you are not a murderer, but I hope that you. But I wonder how your training and your formation is as you grow. I mean, you talk about the inspiration that you have. But that inspiration has to be literally distilled into a practical, real scent. I mean, how do you go about learning that trade?
There's a lot of things going on in fragrance making, and the different perfumers we work with have different experiences, but mostly you need a bit of chemistry. Well, the first thing is you need a lot of passion. If since you're a kid, smells really affect you. If you want to smell everything that's around you, if smells drive you crazy, that's important. And then there's a bit of chemistry, about a couple of years. And then it's mainly just learning, training. For me, it's an art. So you need to learn your colors, like if it was painting, learn how to do the different dimensions. And it's after 10, 15 years, you usually get a master perfumer that will teach you. And after 10, 15 years, then you really get your own writing, and then you can really express your own stories.
And tell us now, let's dive deeper a little bit more into the scents. It smells absolutely exquisite in here, ladies and gentlemen. I wish you could all be with me. Just tell us a little bit about, talk us through what you've brought with us. You have some tiny, exquisite little samples, which probably aren't enjoying the strong sunlight. But tell us what we've got.
I brought you a few samples of our collection. I brought you Tableau Parisien because I thought with the Olympics, Paris was quite important. Tableau Parisien is actually a fragrance that really matters to me. It's when Tableau Parisien is a bit of an homage to Paris. I wanted an homage to the Paris Art Deco, and when you smell it, you kind of are sent to that period, but are also sent to like a whole nouvelle vague vibe. There's something very nonchalant about Tableau Parisien, but there's something super chic about it.
It's very powerful, but in a sort of rather understated way. This is really hard to do, ladies and gentlemen. Well, you're going to have to do the description of the words, sure, because my nose doesn't quite translate into words accurately.
So you get basically the nonchalance of Paris and the sexiness of it. So at the beginning, what we worked on is a tubéreuse, but from India. So tubéreuse is a flower, but in India, throughout the day, it becomes, with the heat, it becomes more and more animalistic. So you've got something very sexy with an animalistic flower, but then I wanted the nonchalance of Paris behind it. So you've got touches of spices, with pepper, with cinnamon, and behind the nonchalance of like the tobacco that you can imagine completely in like Nouvelle Vague movies.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. We're all sold. Tell us about the next one.
Well, all of our fragrances are very poetic, and there's something very fun about it. But the next ones in September, I wanted something much more brutalist, much more opulent. So we're going a bit crazy, where our collection is now, quite poetic. We're making extracts of 2 of our fragrances. So I'm making an extract of Yvonne that already exists, and an extract of Toi Toi Toi. So it's like we're telling the same story, but in a very different way.
Yvonne being your grandmother.
Yeah, exactly. Well, she hated her name, but now she's super proud of it, and I have to give her bottles every week when I go to see her, because she gives them to all of her friends at church, so it's costing us money.
You're creating perfumes with family members and locations in mind. How often do you think about the person who is actually going to wear it?
I don't think it's my job after. What I need to do is to tell the most honest story as possible. After the process of creation is the first excitement in my job. I think the second excitement is when someone tells me, that's the fragrance I wore at my wedding. And that means a lot to us. And I know that forever they will have that smell in their head. But my goal is mainly to make something creative and hopefully people like it. But I have to concentrate on our own creative process.
That was Baptiste Bouige, co-founder of Maison Ormé Paris. For more Parisian culture and all things Olympics, tune in to our special coverage from the French capital. Join us for Monocle in Paris at 8 a.m. London time, Monday to Friday. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's briefing, it is Thursday, and that means that our global countdown expert and musical curator-in-chief, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, is with me right here in our Midori House studio. Fernando, you've brought us to follow on from the top of the show, your play on words. You brought us some Turkish delights.
Absolutely. You stole it from me, Chris. I'm joking. I think we both had the same idea, right?
We both had the same idea. We couldn't really resist.
But
Where could we possibly be heading?
I genuinely thought I would brought you some delights because we're heading to Turkey, and I think it's a very exciting music scene. As you know, I've been mourning since Turkey left Eurovision because I think they always had excellent entries. I'm still hoping that one day they will be back. But for now, we're looking at their top 5 songs at the moment. I gotta warn you though, number 5 is very emotional. Very emotional.
Are there going to be tears here in the studio?
There might be, but although it's a hip-hop song, so, it's not quite...
not that emotional.
Not that emotional. But I'll tell you more about the lyrics after. But this is the rapper Ati 242 with Değişmene rağmen, which means despite the change. Let's have a listen.
Uğramış hikayemiz, yıllar sonra kavuştuk sandık artık beraberiz. Sanardım değişmez hiç aşklarda lisan. Olmuşuz artık iki bambaşka insan. Sanki aylardan nisan sıcak.
I was reading the lyrics attentively. I couldn't quite understand if the song is about childhood trauma or tragic love. One of those for sure. I would like to speak to Ati too.
It's quite a difference. Right?
There's a bit of a difference, but I am so confused.
Both emotional. Okay.
He's an emotional man. He's a 27-year-old doing very well in Turkey.
Young love? I mean, could that be to combine the two?
I would please ask our Turkish listeners to tell me more. But I like the beat. The Turkish hip hop scene is big. It's very it's been there for quite a few decades right now. So I quite enjoy the track.
Fernando, I do have a feeling that this is one of those countries, which I often like as well when we do this, that will have mostly its own music and not much sort of international. So we're going to be hearing, I'm imagining, quite a few Turkish tracks.
You are very right. So on number 4, he is also a Turkish rapper. But this song, Chris, I do feel kind of a Latin influence to it. Even the song's name is not in Turkish. This is El Musto with Dale Don Dale. Let's have a listen.
Çıktım gezdim İstanbul 15 mahalle. Var senin gibi 15 tane. Her gece biri arıyor beni. Musto gel diyor yandım cane. Gel söndür beni diyorlar bana güldür beni. Unuttum
I mean, this is super catchy.
It is catchy, bouncing. We're all bouncing at this point.
It's bouncy. That's the word for
bouncy.
It. And the lyrics, I mean, the beauties are with me, so I have no business with you. That's one of the lyrics. I mean, sorry, Google Translate must be doing a terrible job.
We apologize to any Turkish listeners out there. You can write in after the show. Direct your comments to Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Exactly. Chris, don't worry. Number 3, I think I could add this song to the playlist right now. It's summery, it's sexy, it's fun. It's by one of the top Turkish singers at the moment. Her name is Singe. Shall we have a listen? The song, I mean, look at the name of the song. I'm translating here. Summer is coming. Let's have a listen.
Bükülür bedenim önüne, büküle diye. Değişir içimin sıcağı, süreriz güne. Yanacak yansın yerin, döneriz deliye. Ne zaman o zaman yavrum şimdi değilse.
I do think we need a Turkish track in our music here on Monocle Radio, Fernando. I don't think we have one at the moment.
Would you approve if I add this track?
I would take that, a summer track.
It's
that too.
It's hot. I mean, the warmth inside me changes. We ride south. It will burn. Let my heart burn. We'll go crazy. According to Singer, by the way. And she
but those could be your words too, frankly, Fernando.
She changes her outfit so many times in the video. She's very glamorous. But then there's a very weird man wearing shorts and he's doing a silly dance inside a giant sauna. So I would recommend people to go and check it out, the video for this track as well by Singer.
It does sound very Turkish, frankly.
Yes.
All right, well, what do we have at number 2?
A fantastic track, a different vibe here, and he's a very young man, 25 years old. His name is Emre Fel, and the thing is, his song is actually in many ways quite traditional Anatolian music with some synthesizers added. It's very beautiful. I think this man has the capacity to become a global superstar. I don't know.
Watch the space.
This is Emre Fel with Sana El Pense Durman, which means I won't lay my hands on you. Let's have a listen.
I feel like Tarkan was the last big Turkish global star. Could he kind of reach that level?
I think so. He's very stylish. He does have very long, straight hair. He does wear very cool clothes, like an Anatolian cowboy vibes. I don't know if they have cowboys there, but you know what I mean, right?
He's a Turkish version of cowboy.
Exactly. He's cool. I like it very much. I'm not sure if I would add to the playlist, but who knows? Who knows, Chris?
Who knows? Watch the space for that as well. Continue listening to Monocle Radio to see which tracks Fernando does add from Turkey.
Number 1, let's go bouncy again. This is very bouncy. This is summer. This is cheesy, but we like it. It's Era 7 Capone and Batiflax with Sistak. Let's have a listen.
Üniversite kazan müziği bir cinsiyetçi bulmuş hoş bakmamış bana hoş bakarsın söyle kaç paraya. Tanıştım bebekte adın Natasha dedim uzatma bebek yat aşağı Batu Flex'le piyasayı baş aşağı İnan bana inanmam ben aşka bunu not et.
It's relentless. That's how I would define this song. I mean, it's everywhere in Turkey this summer.
I'm going to say El Musto number 4 was even bouncier, but that is pretty bouncy.
It's pretty bouncy. Great production. And I do think they use a sample of a great song from the early noughties by Nina Sky, Move Your Body. Or maybe Nina Sky actually used that sample. And this sample has been kind of...
It does go in both directions sometimes. Absolutely.
Exactly.
That was a catchy one. Is that playing sort of, do we imagine, everywhere currently in Turkish cafes and shops?
Absolutely. And they are from Istanbul because they do sing about Istanbul in the summer as well in this track.
Istanbul in the summer. We had summer before that as well. There is a summer theme to Turkey like everywhere else in the world. Thank you very much, Fernando. That was Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And that's all the time for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Christy O'Grady. Our researcher was Sana Jumani. And our studio manager was Tamsin Howard. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.